بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم
Assalamu alaikum. It is Wednesday, the 15th of June, 2022, and in our broadcasts, Reflections on the Holy Quran, this is broadcast number 325. And at the moment we are discussing chapter 2, verse 102. And this is the sixth broadcast about the words of that verse of the Holy Quran. These broadcasts are brought to you by LASER, Lahore Ahmadiyya School for Education in Religion, which is a branch of the Ahmadiyya Anjuman-e-Islam, or the Ahmadiyya Association for Propagation of Islam, and which was founded by Hazrat Mirza Ghulam Ahmad Rahmatullah Alayh. And his teaching was that although people say that after the Holy Prophet Muhammad, a prophet shall come or has come, this is incorrect, because the Quran says that the Holy Prophet was Khatamun Nabiyyin, and the Holy Prophet interpreted that as La Nabi Abadi. There is no prophet after me. So now no prophet shall come, whether an old one or a new one. And Hazrat Sahib claimed that in accordance with the Hadith, he was a mujaddid, a reformer. And he came in a chain of reformers. His distinction was that other hadiths talk about Messiah and Mahdi, and those titles apply to him. He was the Mujaddid who was to come as the Messiah and Mahdi. He also taught and warned that Muslims are too hasty and start calling each other heretics and kafirs and out of all of Islam and what have you. But he said that the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in hadith that if one reciter of the kalima says to another reciter of the kalima that you are not a Muslim, then it is the person uttering these words who is not a Muslim. He also taught that people say and believe that some of the prophetic revelation is missing from the Holy Quran, and some that is in the Holy Quran is abrogated. And he said, this is not possible, because the Holy Quran says, in the Holy Quran, God says, I have revealed it and I shall protect it. So when God says he will protect the Holy Quran, then how can it be that his revelation is missed out? And how can it be that the revelation that's in the Holy Quran is abrogated? Hazrat Sahib taught us that jihad is a fundamental duty of every Muslim. But what jihad is, that the Holy Prophet Muhammad told us. When returning from fighting, he said that Muslims were returning from Jihad-e-Asghar, the minor jihad, to Jihad-e-Akbar, the major jihad. And the major jihad is Jihad bin Nafs. And that is a struggle within your own soul, within your own self. A struggle to stop yourself from doing the wrong thing. So, let us turn to chapter 2, verse 102. As I have said, I will not recite the whole verse because it's very long, and I will only recite the parts which are relevant. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واتبعوا ما تتلو الشياطين على ملك سليمان وما كفر سليمان ولكن الشياطين كفروا يعلمون الناس السحر. And they follow what the devils fabricated against the kingdom of Solomon. And Solomon disbelieved not, but the devils disbelieved, teaching men enchantment. Now, devils here, many people say, means not the devil as the creature that led Adam astray, but human beings who behaved in that way. And many people say that kingdom of Solomon, it means prophethood of Solomon. So evil people who didn't want to believe made all manner of accusations and so on against Solomon and his mission and his prophethood. I mean, they did the same thing with all the prophets. So there's nothing new in that. So let's turn to the roots of the words we are going to look at. The first word, Vanas, and we said it's, perhaps we didn't say, we didn't know. Its root, triliteral root, is Noon Va Seen. And it occurs in the Holy Quran 241 times. And its general meaning is people. Like at the very beginning of chapter 2. God says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَقُولُ, the people. Again, كَمَا آمَنَ النَّاسُ, the people. So from people also comes mankind. يَا أَيُّهَا النَّاسُ اعْبُدُوا رَبَّكُمُ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ. You can translate that as "O people," but it means "O humanity, O mankind." So that's the meaning of this. In a few places, it's translated as mankind or humankind, I guess, would be the politically correct translation of this thing. So, going back to my notes, which have a bit more detail. So there's some disagreement. Some people says that in the word una sun, the first hamza was dropped, so you had nasun, and then al was added, making it an-nasun. And the other people say that no, that's not correct. It's from nasiya, noon, seen, ya, and so on. So these are sort of technical discussions and so on. So, but our objective is to try and see what sort of guidance we can get from the Holy Quran. So the Holy Quran says, "Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas," chapter 104, verse 1. Say, I seek refuge in who? Rabbin nas. The Rabb, the creator of the people. Sometimes, and this is, I guess, a kind of a metaphor, although the word is used, it doesn't apply to the whole of humanity. It applies only to a part of humanity. And you might be referring to, someone with a particular attribute. So, for example, chapter 2, verse 13, it says, Aminu kama amanan nas. The way others came to faith, you too. Now, here and nas, it doesn't mean a particular person, but the group, like those people. So that category which had that attribute. Am yahsuduna an-nasa ala ma atahumullahu min fadli. Chapter 4, verse 54. And what God out of his bounty grants people, they are jealous. So Anas here doesn't mean any particular group, but out of human beings, those who have a particular attribute. So let's go to the next word. And its triliteral root is seen, ha, wa, and it occurs in the Holy Quran 63 times in various forms. There are 7 forms, 7 different words are made out of it, and in total, they all appear in the Holy Quran 63 times. 28 times as noun sihr, and 22 times as sahir, and the rest is just once or twice. And it stands for magic, magician, become deluded, become bewitched. Falamma alqaw saharu, and they bewitched them. Anna tusharu, are you deluded? And so one of its basic meanings is to turn or twist, so that you turn the meaning of something, a falsehood, and make it look real. It's a bit like sometimes people convince you to do the wrong thing and they make it look right. It's like, in some countries, people don't pay income tax or general sales tax and so on. And if someone tries to pay, they discourage them as well. No, why do you want to pay these taxes? No one else is paying, so why are you paying? What difference is it going to make if you pay, because no one else will pay, and you're, I don't know, whatever it is, £10,000 is not going to go very far in providing free education and free whatever, etc. So what they are doing is they're twisting to convince you. I mean, the obvious reply to this argument is that on the day of judgment, God is going to question you about your deeds, what you did. God is not going to ask you whether your next door neighbor paid his tax or not. So whatever it was. And in fact, it's a very interesting point, because you see, this is what leads to problems. This is, the false justification for doing something illegal and wrong, but to try and make it legal and correct. And some places, the Holy Quran says to people, I think it's chapter 46, verse 185, and God says, you are those people who were deceived once, but they carry on falling into this trap. Why is that? You fall into someone's trap once, you should learn. Okay, maybe you fall into the same trap twice. I'll give you an example. That someone came to me. I used to give a day of my time to an organization in the UK called Citizens Advice Bureau, which provides free legal help and advice for people who can't afford to go to solicitors. And this man came, and he was in huge debt. Because what happened was, his friend had a system, and that system meant that if you gambled, you could never lose. It was a system for, I don't know, the roulette table or whatever it was. I can't remember. And so he asked this man to let him use his credit card. He said, let's go. You can use your credit card and I'll use my system. And they lost. And the guy with the credit card ended up in a huge amount of debt. So anyway, we managed to clear the debt and all this kind of thing, etc., etc. And the friend who had this system deceived him again. He said, "Oh well, I've now figured out the problem with my system. Yes, there was a fault in it, and I've corrected that. Now we'll go and use the system, and you're not going to lose any money." And what happened? Yes, you guessed it. He again lost, and he returned to Citizen Advice Bureau for help again. Well, I refused to help him. I said to the manager, "You get someone else to deal with him. I want to help people who have genuine problems and who learn lessons from doing these things, not someone who keeps on repeating the same thing over and over again." The Holy Prophet's opponents in chapter 17, verse 47, they would call him Rajulan Mashura, Rajul man, person. So this is person who's been deceived, a person who's been bewitched, a person who's lost his senses now. So, because what the Holy Prophet Muhammad was doing, he was saying things which were extraordinary. A black person is the same, has the same rights as a white person. You can't mistreat animals, you can't overload them, and you can't mistreat slaves and your wives and your children and so on. So, one thing, one example might illustrate the significance of this seher, and that is when you have ventriloquists. You see this man standing there, and his lips are not moving, but the dummy's lips are moving, and it looks as if the dummy is speaking. Now we all know that is impossible. But he's turned the truth, the facts, to make it look as if it's the dummy that is speaking. And another interesting thing is that I was watching a video of a scientific experiment, and in a dish they had some powder, and they poured some alcohol over it. And suddenly, that powder turned into a kind of snake, and it literally leapt up from the dish because of the chemical reaction. It jumped up, and it became like a long snake, and it leapt out of the dish, and so on and so forth. So maybe, I don't know, at Hazrat Isa alayhi salam's time, they had this compound from which they made this powder. They had alcohol and so on. Maybe it was something like that happened. We don't know. Another thing to remember is that the last part of the night is also called Sahar. Especially in Ramadan, we sort of know what does Sahar ends. We need to stop eating, etc. Yeah. And the idea of deception is in there as well, because the darkness of the night and the light of the day are so mixed up that it's difficult to tell sometimes what's happening. This is why it's called Sahar. So, the time where you might be deceived. But there's an important application of it, and that is that in many countries there are people who use this to line their own pockets. You see, man's development has been gradual. Initially, humans worshipped everything. A twisted tree in the desert, a volcano about to erupt. All these things they didn't understand, and they thought, oh, they're all gods. We've upset them. The example of volcano, people thought, oh, we've upset the volcano god. So quick, get a girl and throw her in the volcano. That will please the god. Because they didn't understand the reasons behind what was happening. And the whole thing was twisted in a different direction. And then what happened was that you had professional religious people. And it may be that sometimes something happened, like the river was about to flood and this guy did something. And through some natural means, the water went down. The river didn't flood and destroy crops and so on. And people started thinking, oh, this guy who read out some incantation that we couldn't understand and then blew on the river, look, the water went back. So, just from worshipping these things, humanity was moving to try and control these things in some way. But the attempts were irrational. And sadly, this still goes on. Many people who have psychological problems, or sometimes, some kind of mental problem, like autism and so on. What happens is people take them to these so-called holy men who charge them a huge amount of money. And then they beat them, and then they recite these incantations and blow on people and all this kind of thing. I mean, where we lived in Pakistan, the landlord, this man was a good businessman. He had a couple of properties rented out and he had other businesses and so on. And his son had epilepsy. Now we know epilepsy can be controlled by drugs and so on. But someone convinced him that some jinn had got hold of his son and he's residing within the son. And he's the one causing his son to behave in this way and have these fits and so on. And I saw this guy, he was about my age one day, and perhaps a bit older. He didn't look too well. So I said to him, what's the matter? Are you okay? And he said, oh, well, my father took me to this person to drive out the evil spirit that's taken over my body. And, that's made me very tired. And to my amazement, he said, this gentleman, he was beating the spirit, and the spirit was feeling the pain and screaming and crying and so on. And although he was black and blue, he maintained he didn't feel any pain. He didn't feel anything. And such ignorance and such people are doing great harm to people and their health and so on. They are charlatans. People have cancer and they'll charge them huge amounts of money to cure cancer. How can they cure cancer? And they'll, recite some incantations and blow on these people and all this kind of thing. And some people even give up their medication, believing that these things are going to cure them. So the interpretation that something that twists the truth is absolutely right and spot on. And we should be careful with these people. Sometimes people say, well, you grew up in the West, what do you know about these spiritual things and so on? The point is, God created science as well. He created everything. And some nations and some people have chosen to use the faculties and facilities that God provided to further our knowledge and try and control disease and so on. Whereas sadly, other people have just turned it into mumbo jumbo, much to the harm of a lot of people. Anyway, with that, I'll take my leave of you with a prayer that whoever you are and wherever you may be, may Allah keep the whole of humanity safe and sound and free from harm. Assalamu alaikum, Khuda Hafiz, and goodbye.